That debate, it's gone. And that too is what will happen with the same-sex marriage. By 2020, I predict, 2025 at the latest, no one will even talk about this anymore. And by the way, my other prediction is that the Christians will take credit for this rights revolution. They go, you know that Episcopalian minister guy? That was our guy. We do all along, you know, God loves everybody. Yeah, okay, well, we have the surveys. I printed them in here. So we can remind everyone, whatever it takes to get there, of course. But it's good to, as a social scientist, you want to know, well, what actually drives these things? What causes the change to be made? So my thesis is that it's science and reason. By which I mean, after the scientific revolution, all thinkers after Newton, Galileo, Newton, Copernicus, sort of the champions of the scientific revolution, all thinkers after them were inspired to apply the same idea. The idea being that the universe is governed by natural laws and principles that we can understand and then apply to change the world. And so everybody after them, Montesquieu and David Hume and John Locke and Immanuel Kant and all the great thinkers that we think of that gave us, you know, the whole liberal Enlightenment worldview, the humanistic worldview, those were all based on the idea that we can discover principles about the world and figure out what they are and then apply them and make the world a better place. So in other words, for example, instead of moralizing about people's sinful behavior, you treat it as a problem to be solved. Like, why are there so many homicides? What can we do to cause homicides to decline? Instead of just locking people up and torturing them and putting them to death, by the way, the death penalty is on death row here in America. I'm predicting 2025 it'll be gone. They can't even get the drugs anymore to put these guys to death, and they botch the executions, which is really weird because the guys are always executed, so they weren't really botched. They worked. But what we mean when we say that is that intuitively they suffered, and the whole point of an execution in modern times, starting with the guillotine, was to make the execution, make the person suffering it, to not suffer. That was the whole idea. And in any case, I've never really understood this because I've been a dog owner my whole life, and I've had to put down pets several times. And you just take them to the vet, they give them a shot, they go to sleep, give them a shot, the heart stops, the whole thing's over in like 3 minutes. Just take these guys to the vet. That's really what it comes down to. Okay, I'm not advocating this. Just end the whole process of the death penalty. We're the last nation of those 20 industrial democratic nations, and nobody does this anymore. So that'll be over. Just yet another rights revolution. And then finally, talk about animal rights. We have a long ways to go on that one, but just the idea, starting with Jeremy Bentham, it's not can they talk or can they reason, but can they suffer? And so the idea of the suffering of sentient beings is our moral starting point. So that's where I begin on page 1 as I wrap this up, going backwards. It's the survival and flourishing of sentient beings that we should be concerned about. And there you expand the moral sphere to include more and more. We start with the primates and the cetaceans, whales and dolphins, and so on. But eventually get there. Vegetarianism and veganism is still a single digit. Well, there's probably more here than in the general population. That's still pretty small, but it's growing slowly. And things like bullfighting are no longer thought of as heroic and things like that. So those are all the different kinds of measures, sort of 100 different ways to think about how moral progress comes. But it mostly comes about from you and I trying to figure out ways to make the world a better place. The kind of things you guys are doing here, fundraising drive, food for the poor, and so on. That's what it takes. It's just all of us doing it, just sort of applying our own sensibilities about our moral sentiments to other sentient beings. So I'll end with where I end the book with Martin Luther King, where I began. So that famous speech that March was in 1965. That was March 1965, so we just had the 50th anniversary of that. By the way, it took him 3 times to get there. And so this is another indication of what it takes to bring, sometimes it takes to bring about a moral revolution, is you have to sometimes make people do stuff. So I'm very conflicted about these religious freedom laws. People should be free to not bake a cake for a gay couple in Indiana if they want. It seems reasonable. If you don't want to, don't do it. And you can go out of business and we'll all boycott your, okay. But on the other hand, racist people, bigoted people, sometimes you just have to change the law and enforce the law to get them to come around. When Kennedy said the schools will be integrated, And some southern states like Wallace in Alabama, said, no, we're not going to integrate the schools. Kennedy sent in the federal troops. To end slavery in the United States, we had to have a war. Sometimes that's what it takes. We prefer not to have to do it that way. But eventually people's minds change, and that's what we have to do. We have to change people's minds. You don't want to have to force everybody by law to not do things. Like witch burning. None of us think about witch burning. We don't not do it because it's against the law, although it is against the law. But we don't even need to have the law anymore because it never enters our mind to go out and do that anymore. And that's the long-term goal. So I'll read a final quote from Dr. King, in which he talks about our human nature to have sort of a good side and a dark side. Each of us is two selves. The great burden of life is to always try to keep that higher self in command, and every time that lower self acts up and tells us to do wrong, let us allow the higher self to tell us that we were made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. Well, I'm not a Baptist preacher, as you may have noticed, so I kind of rewrote that a little bit to end the book. We are, in fact, made from the stars. Our atoms were forged in the interior of ancient stars that ended their lives in spectacular paroxysms of supernova explosions that dispersed those atoms into space, where they coalesced into new solar systems with planets, life, and sentient beings capable of such sublime knowledge and moral wisdom. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. I presume you get the reference. In other words, morality is something that carbon atoms can embody, given a billion years of evolution, the moral arc. Thank you.
And while they're doing it, I just want to remind everybody that Dr. Shermer will be in the lobby after today's assembly signing books, so make sure you purchase yours and get it signed by Dr. Shermer.